Hi, it's Dr. Betty Robin with the Dentistry Rising podcast. I'm really happy to say that we're surpassing all of our goals in number of podcast downloads. And that means it seems I'm on the right track as to what you need help with and what you want to know. I do talk to many of you every day since I am a dentist as well as an attorney, and I really get what your issues are. My goal is to help you get where you want to go in the best possible way and to create the practices and lives you are proud of and want. Professional building or shopping center, which is better for a dental practice? Many buyers have a distinct preference as to which they prefer, a professional building or a shopping center. Most young buyers prefer shopping centers, and I generally don't agree with that, and I'll tell you why. I've personally owned practices in several different types of locations. My first practice was in Rancho Cucamonga, in a Kmart shopping center on Haven Avenue. It was a very active and busy shopping center at the time. And I was like many young buyers who wanted that shopping center and went that direction. That lease was by far the most expensive lease I've ever had. My next practice was in an open-air professional building in Claremont, California. I really like that kind of professional building since it can be the best of both worlds. Easy parking, easy access for patients, and usually some visibility. My third practice was in a small shopping center in a more remote area that had only 4 to 5 tenant suites and was set back somewhat from the street. That practice had the lowest rent. So I've tried it all, and my comments here are based not only on my personal experience, but primarily on client experiences after negotiating over 1,000 leases as an attorney. The first and main reasons buyers like shopping centers is visibility. The "I saw you there" reason for becoming a patient of a practice in a shopping center. Is that even valid? I really don't think so. I don't think people go to the dentist because they just saw you there. I mean, would you? I personally wouldn't pick a dentist or a dermatologist or even a hair salon or a massage place based solely on the fact I saw them while I was shopping at Albertsons or getting my coffee at Starbucks. I just wouldn't. Sometimes it's a bonus. Someone I want to go to happens to be in a shopping center I go to, but it isn't the reason I go there. I think people pick low and mid-range dentists based on whether the practice accepts their insurance, and then next on their Google or Yelp reviews. And people pick high-end dentists, usually based almost solely on referrals or pictures of their work, not because they're in a shopping center. Just saying, it's rare for patients to end up at your office just because you're next door to a Starbucks. Of course, I'm just using Starbucks as an example here. The higher in the practice, the less likely it is to be in the shopping center. I mean, if I were going to pick a high-end dermatologist, plastic surgeon, or dentist, I would actually veer away from someone in a shopping center. Okay, next, shopping center locations are usually associated with coupons, Groupons, deals, promotions, etc. I just don't think that's the way to go for a professional practice, always chasing down the lowest fee in town. And shopping center locations are usually associated with off hours. In fact, specific hours of operation are often required in a shopping center lease. Now, I'm not saying that working off hours is not a good thing. I think it is. But having to work certain hours required in a lease just doesn't feel good to me. Now, most importantly, rent in a shopping center is almost always higher because owners can charge more in shopping centers because of location and because you also have to pay CAM. Location is important to retail. I mean, people do go to a Starbucks because they just saw it there. They are risking only a cup of coffee, not their teeth or their health. And it isn't only the base rent that's higher, it's the costs associated with the rent. And in shopping centers, many times you have to rent more space than you actually need. I think that's always a bad idea because the rent just keeps going up year after year. And a space that is just sitting is a total waste of money. Okay, let's step back for a minute and talk about different kinds of leases. There are three main kinds of leases: triple net, modified gross, and gross. They can go by other names, but it really boils down to one of these three. It's really important that you understand the differences. Let's start by defining a term I've used already: CAM, or triple net charges. They generally mean about the same thing. CAM stands for Common Area Maintenance Charges. In a triple net lease, all the expenses of the property lease are passed to the tenants based on their percentage of occupancy. By all, I mean absolutely everything, including management fees. This usually adds 50 cents a square foot to over $1 square foot to the lease charges. So when you are comparing locations and leases, make sure you are comparing apples to apples. And it is important to ask how much the CAM is at the time you're signing the lease. That amount is not guaranteed, but should give you an idea of how much it is at least now per square foot. And that's what you want to know, the cost per square foot. CAM charges should reflect actual expenses of the center and therefore are almost never capped to a certain amount. I mean limited to a certain amount. In most leases, CAM charges are dealt with differently depending on the type of expense. There are generally ordinary expenses and capital expenses, both. For example, a capital improvement, meaning improvement that will be capitalized by the owner, which means written off over a period of time depending on the useful life of the item, by the owner, that is, are usually collected from tenants over a period of time as well, most commonly 12 years. But ordinary expenses, which are most of the expenses, are charged out in the year they are incurred. So as an example of a capitalized expense, if the building needs a new roof and your portion of the roof is $12,000, you would pay the landlord back $1,000 per year until your portion is paid off. But for building janitorial, water, trash, gas, management, pretty much everything else, those are ordinary expenses and you will pay those according to your percent of occupancy on a monthly basis. So triple net leases, which are generally most shopping center leases, are by far the most expensive lease you can enter into. I mean, sometimes they're worth it, and sometimes great practices are in shopping centers, but I think it's the exception rather than the rule. Okay, let's talk about the other two types of leases, the modified gross lease and the gross lease. Most professional building leases and small shopping center leases are what's called modified gross leases. This means you will pay your portion of the expenses based on the increase of the building expenses after the year you moved in. The year you moved in is called your base year. As an example, if the expenses for the building were $100,000 the year you moved in, and they increased to $120,000 for the next year, you would only be responsible for your portion based on your percent of occupancy of $20,000. That is the increase. If the lease was a triple net lease, you'd be responsible for your portion of the entire $120,000. You can see that a modified gross lease is much less expensive. A modified gross lease is by far the most common type of lease. The last type of lease is a true gross lease. That means you pay no expenses except your agreed upon rent. This is unusual, at least in popular areas, but certainly still can be seen in more out-of-the-way areas or in less desirable buildings. Okay, let's talk about the configuration of space in a shopping center. Most shopping center dental space, that is long and skinny. They're like bowling alleys. That's what my practice in Rancho Cucamonga was like. That's because the owner is trying to fit as many tenants in as possible, and dentists have a limited need for square footage. And newer shopping centers usually won't even let dentists anywhere near that Starbucks, because dentists pay lower rent than most retail stores, who pay a percentage of their proceeds along with their rent. And it's important for us to remember also that developers and owners do not think dentists actually draw people into the center the way other tenants will. Therefore, we often get the worst space. So yes, I have a preference, and it's professional buildings. Open-air professional buildings are probably my absolute favorite because of ease of parking and access for patients. But high-rise professional buildings are the norm in many high-end areas, and I think they're better than shopping centers in most cases. So to sum it up, I prefer professional buildings because the lower overall cost. Second, more professional atmosphere overall. Third, you generally don't have to rent more space than you actually need. And lastly, your space generally has a more desirable layout. That is, isn't long and skinny and often has windows. So that's what I think, and consider it carefully and let me know what you think. If you are thinking of going forward with a project, you might want to talk to lender Matthew Christie of Bank of America. He really knows a lot and can help you. And B of A always has a lot of loan options available, usually at good rates. Matt works nationwide, and I'm sure you can Google him, but his email is matthew.christie@bankofamerica.com. Please subscribe to Dentistry Rising on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or whatever your favorite player is. And if you want to talk about something in particular, you can always email me at drrobin@bettyrobin.com or comment on Twitter or Instagram, Dr. Betty Robin. Thank you and happy listening.